Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining the National Community Action Partnership for today's webinar. We would love for you to use the chat to let us know who has joined us today, your name, agency, and where you're located. My name is Katie Smith, and I'm a program associate with the National Community Action Partnership. And I will be working behind the scenes of today's webinar, along with my colleague, Denise Waits, to make sure everything runs smoothly. A few technical notes before we get started. We will be recording the webinar and will share both the recording and the slides within 1 to 2 days following today's presentation. If you have any questions or comments during today's presentation, please submit those using the chat. Today's presentation is titled Mutual Reinforcement for Two-Generation Initiatives, a New Measurement Tool. And before we begin, the National Community Action Partnership would like to acknowledge that every community owes its existence and vitality to the generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will, some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Today, I'm joining you from my home in Virginia. For me, this meeting is being held on the traditional lands of the Tutelot people. I pay my respect, both past and present, to those who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We've placed a link in the chat, and we encourage you to look up and acknowledge the lands of where you're joining us from today. We would also like to begin by grounding ourselves in the promise of community action. Feel free to say this along with me. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. And I'd like to introduce the Practice Transformation team. In today's meeting, we have myself, I'm Katie Smith, Program Associate for Communication and Dissemination, my colleague Denise Waits, our Administrative Coordinator, and my colleague Jeannie Chaffin, who's our Special Advisor of the Whole Family Approach. I'm now going to pass off to her as she introduces our amazing panelists today.
Thanks, Katie, and welcome everybody this afternoon. We're very excited to bring with you some really groundbreaking work that is going to, I think, accelerate a lot of our whole family approach efforts across the Community Action Network. And I'm very excited to introduce new friends from Mathematica. And Mathematica has been supporting the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, or OPRE, which is at the Administration for Children and Families, on an evaluation learning project titled Next Steps for Rigorous Research on Two-Generation Approaches project. And we've been paying close attention to this project. There have been a couple of community action agencies involved in this, and Scott and Kara will share some of that with you here in a moment. Scott Baumgardner and Kara Conroy are senior researchers at Mathematica. They were with us at the annual conference a few weeks ago. Some of you might have heard their presentation. I'm sure many more of you were not able to attend in Atlanta and are here today to hear about these new tools. There are some briefs that have been released by OPRE and a new final report that's hot off the press this week, and some tools that are going to help many of you who have been shifting to a whole family approach maybe think about your two-gen work in a new way. So I'm going to hand it over to them because we want to just allow them plenty of time, and we want to allow all of you time for questions because we know you're going to want to use some of these tools. And so you may have some questions about how to put them to use. So Scott and Kara, take it away. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jeannie, and Katie, and everybody who's attending today. Whether you saw us in Atlanta and we were so good that you wanted to come back and hear it again, or whether this is your first time, I'm going to start. Let me share my screen. And I'm going to start just by giving a little bit of background on the NS2G project that Jeannie mentioned, and a little bit the focus from our work to provide some context. And then I'll turn it over to Kara to talk about this measure that we've released today and give you a little bit of a demonstration. So OPRE sponsored the NS2G project to build the evidence base for fully integrated and intentional models for two-generation service delivery. And I just want to mention right at the top that this is just one of several projects that are part of OPRE's investment in coordinated services research and evaluation. So the Administration for Children and Families, of which OPRE is a part, has a mission to promote the economic and social well-being of families, children, individuals, and communities. And so there's a portfolio of research and evaluation projects that seeks to understand the coordination of services that address families' interdependent and complex challenges. Um, Two-generation approaches are just one type of service coordination. The research in this portfolio includes projects in childcare, Head Start, home visiting, child welfare, and self-sufficiency. And if you're interested in learning more, the QR code on the slide will take you to OPRE's website where you can learn about all of the research and products that they have produced. So there were three objectives of the NS2G project. And together, these objectives help achieve the overarching goal to build this evidence base for two-generation service delivery. The first objective was to conduct some formative research, that is, research designed to strengthen services rather than to evaluate their effectiveness. I talked a bunch about that at the presentation in Atlanta. We're going to not really focus on that today, but the resources that Jeannie mentioned definitely go into that if you are interested. The second objective was to build the evaluation capacity of another set of two-generation initiatives we were working with, and we accomplished that through our learning community, and our final report talks about that as well. But this third objective is what we're going to focus on today. And the objective was to address measurement issues to promote learning across evaluations and to get a better understanding of the relevant processes and outcomes of two-generation initiatives. And so for researchers like Kara and myself, it's really important to be able to measure what two-generation approaches or what whole family approaches do to understand how they can be effective. But for you as practitioners, it can also help as part of a continuous quality improvement process. And so Kara is going to talk about what we did to develop and test this measure of two-generation initiative functioning. As Jeannie mentioned, we partnered with 10 different two-generation approaches in this project, including, and you see in bold, 2 community action agencies, Aroostook County Action Program in Maine and Garrett County Community Action Committee in Maryland. And Garrett County in particular actually participated in the development and piloting of the measure that we're talking about today. So I want to take a step back and just quickly do some level setting about what we consider, what we mean when we say two-generation initiatives. And so it's right in the name of the project. And this is the definition that we used on our project in particular. The two-generation initiatives intentionally combine intensive, high-quality adult-focused services with intensive, high-quality child-focused programs to improve outcomes for children, primary caregivers, and families. And so embedded within this definition are kind of three key features that researchers hypothesize should be present for two-generation initiatives to achieve their intended outcomes. And those are intentionality, quality, and intensity. So intentionality is it means to purposefully and deliberatively link services with the needs of caregivers, their children, and the family's shared goals in mind. When we talk about quality, we talk about the program features that are associated with improved outcomes for the populations that a program serves. And when we talk about intensity, we're thinking about providing services with enough duration and dosage to achieve those intended outcomes. So you're probably familiar with the term whole family approaches. These, for all intents and purposes, can be used interchangeably. The two-gen initiatives that we talk about on this project are a kind of whole family approach. And we simply provided somewhat of a more narrow definition just to focus our research, but it's not intended to be this really strict standard. So for NS2G, we focus specifically on two-generation initiatives that support child development and improve family economic security. So some examples of services there include like workforce development or adult education services. Child services include things like high quality preschool, Head Start, home visiting. And when we think about family services, some examples there are family coaching or housing assistance. Um, Community action agencies like yourselves obviously provide a lot of other services that help families, like energy assistance. They were just not really a focus of our research, but that does not mean that the measure isn't applicable to you all. This measure is intended to be applicable to all whole family or two-generation approaches, regardless of the specific services that they provide. So the slide here kind of shows what we call a change model for two-generation initiatives. And this model is intended to show how an optimally functioning two-generation initiative would work to achieve outcomes for parents, for caregivers, for children, and for families. And so if you are interested in learning more about this model, again, you can click on the QR code or take a picture of the QR code, and that will take you to a brief that provides this in some more detail. But I just want to highlight some of the features and some of the terms that may come up during our presentation today. So first is this box at all the way to the left on the family. And I want to highlight here that it really reflects the whole family, including the needs and interests of parents and caregivers and children. Two-generation initiatives consider the needs of each generation and how the people in their lives and their circumstances might influence them. And so you see there are two white arrows in this box, and that illustrates this idea that there are intra-family dynamics going on, that family members are influenced and affected by each other. So say a child's progress in a Head Start program might inspire a parent to pursue new goals or vice versa. And that's something that we call mutual motivation. The focus on the needs of each generation in the family overall is reflected throughout the model. You can see that in the outcomes boxes to the right, we include separate, we call out specifically what are your outcomes for adults, for children, and for the family or the home as a whole. In the middle here is this service model box. And this model highlights separate services for adults and for children. And in particular, in the middle of the box is this, it says coordinated services design here. This emphasizes that services for adults and children should be aligned, intentionally aligned and coordinated. That's that intentionality piece that I mentioned on the previous slide. So on NS2G, the measure that we developed is intended to assess the alignment and the coordination of services. Between each of these boxes are these crossed arrows. And this is really where I see the promise of two-generation or whole family approaches coming in. They represent the idea that services for one generation can affect outcomes for the other. So by intentionally aligning and coordinating services for caregivers and children, two-generation initiatives have the potential to help families achieve outcomes above and beyond what single-generation services could achieve individually. So with that, let me turn it to Kara to talk about what you came to hear about today.
Great, thanks, Scott. You can hit that next slide. So as Scott mentioned, one of our objectives on NS2G was to develop and test a draft measure of two-generation initiative functioning. So the measurement tool that we ultimately developed was designed to capture mutual reinforcement. But let's start with what that video or what that term actually means. So mutual reinforcement occurs in two-generation initiatives when service providers align and build on each other's efforts to serve whole families by adopting a shared vision and working toward common or compatible goals. And these efforts, as Scott was just describing, are intentionally coordinated to make use of each service provider's strengths or expertise. So they can include things like designing and offering services of high quality and appropriate intensity to caregivers and children in the same families, developing and using shared measures to assess both caregivers and children in the same families, or developing a common theory of change or aligned mission statements, again, to positively affect both generations within a family. And the reason that we want to try to measure this as researchers is that we hypothesize that mutual reinforcement is really necessary to achieve sorry, just let Scott go back to that previous slide. Yeah. So the reason we want to try to measure this is, as researchers, is that we hypothesize that mutual reinforcement is really necessary to achieve some of those broader shared outcomes for both generations. So really beyond what each individual service provider would be able to achieve, working independently and on their own. So that's what led us here to the measure that we'll share with you today. So the mutual reinforcement measurement tool, which I am very happy to say is live and available on the OPRE website as of today, includes 14 sets of survey style questions, and it takes about 30 minutes to complete. And after you go through this exercise, you complete the 14 sets of questions, the tool will generate for you 4 different scores. So the first is an overall mutual reinforcement score, and then a score for each of the 3 subscales. So those 3 subscales capture the extent to which all partners first are aligned on vision, mission, and theory of change. So that's that principles subscale. It also captures the extent to which all partners share goals for serving whole families, measures or indicators, and have systems in place for sharing data. So that's that infrastructure subscale. And then finally, the service delivery strategies subscale captures the extent to which all partners align and build on each other's areas of strength to offer services of comparable quality, duration, and intensity to caregivers and children in the same families. And all the scores in the tool, so that overall mutual reinforcement score, and then also the score for each of those subscales range from 1 to 5. And just a note here, so we've designed this tool so that the higher scores indicate stronger levels of mutual reinforcement, but this tool and its scoring methodology are preliminary and not yet validated. So we've really just done a small pilot so far. So while we assume that improving scores coincide with strengthening mutual reinforcement, we don't really know yet what scores translate to emergent, strong, or really exemplary levels of mutual reinforcement, and some more testing is needed after the NS2G project. But despite this early stage of development, we still want to get it out there, release it now, because we believe it's really a promising tool for two-generation initiatives, or those of you who are using whole family approaches, to use so that you can identify areas for strengthening your approach to serving whole families. And Scott, I don't know if you want to launch into this poll, give people some Menti instructions here.
Sure. So we'd like to do a poll just to kind of hear where you think your community action agencies are most mutually reinforcing. And so we're asking you to think about those principles or infrastructure. But you can, it looks like some of you have already started, but to respond to this poll, you can either use your phone to click on the QR code on the screen, or you can navigate to menti.com and enter the code that you see on the screen, which is 86855481. Give it another minute to respond. It's okay to not know. I think that's good that this tool shows that this tool has some promise for helping you think through that. All right. Should we move on, Kara?
Yeah, that sounds great. One reaction I had too is I wasn't surprised about the infrastructure one perhaps being the lowest. I know when trying to work, across different programs and kind of a whole family approach, I think some of the data sharing and some of that infrastructure is particularly challenging. So not surprising to see that there. So in just a second, we're going to take a few minutes just to walk through the electronic version of the measurement tool. So in this electronic version, it's based in Excel. You can answer the questions as you go, and that Excel file will automatically generate those 4 scores that I talked about. But there's also a paper and pencil version. It's a PDF copy that's also on the OPRE website that you could print out and use if you prefer to start there. And then you can enter your answers into this Excel tool that I'm going to share in just a second once you're done so that you can see your scores. And before we dive into that demo, I'll just offer a suggestion that you should think about saving a copy of the tool each time you go through this exercise. That way you can refer back to your score and see how it changes over time as you're taking efforts to strengthen mutual reinforcement with whom you're working with. So I am going to share my screen and pull up the tool here. All right. So where we start here is on the landing page. So this landing page, or this first tab in the Excel-based tool, it's called Introduction and Instructions. It contains a description of the NS2G project and the concept of mutual reinforcement, and then also a recommended process for completing the tool. We'll go over that in just a minute, but that's listed right here. And the 14 sets of survey style questions begins on the 3rd tab with question 1. Throughout the measurement tool, there's a few fill in the blank questions, but most of them are multiple choice using drop-down menus. And to move between the questions, you can either click on these individual question tabs at the bottom, or once you're done completing a question, you can click to the next question at the bottom, and it will automatically bring you to that next tab. So we've pre-populated the copy of the measurement tool that you see here with some example data, but when you pull the tool down yourself, it will all be blank and ready for you to answer your own responses. So let's dive in and take a look at what question 1 is asking us here. So question 1 asks you to list all of your distinct 2-generation partners. So let's say you're not quite sure what a 2-generation partner is. You can navigate to the important exercise definitions on tab 2 and see how that term or any other terms you might be unclear on are defined for this tool. So popping back to question 1 here, it doesn't contribute to your mutual reinforcement score. Instead, it's meant to help you reflect on all the partners you might be working with who are involved in your initiative so that you can answer the rest of the questions with those partners in mind. And taking a look at question 2. So this one starts with the instructions here that says, for the remainder of the survey, all partners in your 2-generation initiative refers to your organization and the organizations, agencies, and/or individuals that you indicated in question 1. So keeping that in mind, question 1 asks you to indicate how much you agree or disagree with a series of statements about all partners in your 2-generation initiative. So let's take a look at 2D for an example. So 2D asks you to indicate how much you agree or disagree with the statement that all partners in our 2-generation initiative share an overarching vision for change of how they would like to affect family well-being. So this is one of those drop-down type questions. You would click this arrow over to the right and select your response here among strongly disagree, disagree, neither agree nor disagree, agree, or strongly agree. So once you answer all the sub-questions that's on that tab, you can click to the next question at the bottom, or you can use those tabs here. But I'm not going to go through every question. We would be here all day. So let's take a look at the series of questions on data use and sharing next. So the thing I want to point out here is that the measurement tool is programmed with skip logic, which means that the questions you're asked might change based on the responses that you're entering into the tool. So as an example here, you'll see in question 9 that my response, or sorry, after question 9 here, there's a row that's grayed out here. And the reason that's grayed out is because of the response that I answered for question 9. So if I change this answer here, the question was, which method best describes how you and your partner share data about family services or outcomes related to your 2-generation initiative? And I responded that partners share aggregate data, but only as needed. If I had given a different response, it might have asked me, or it would have asked me to complete question 10. And that can happen on the individual item level. It can also happen on a whole set of questions. So you'll see, based on what I answered in question 9, I wasn't asked question 10, question 11, or question 12. And the reason that we, show you this is that if you're using the measurement tool and see that a question is skipped, it's really intentional and not a cause for concern. So you can just go on to the next question that's available to you. So after you've answered all of the questions through question 14, you can then go to a tab called the results summary table. So on the results summary table, you can review your responses, find out which questions you might have missed or were logically skipped. So those are the ones that are in yellow highlighted right here. And clicking any of the individual questions in this tab will take you back to the tab where that question is actually hosted so that you can review, and then if needed, you can answer it if you accidentally skipped it. So I think, or maybe I know, that these were logically skipped, but I'll just show you how this works here. So if I go back to question 10, this is the one that we just reviewed that was logically skipped based on my response to question 9. So I know that's not something that I need to fill out. But I would recommend, as you're going through your results summary table, just take a look at anything that you see that's highlighted in yellow and just click that question and it will bring you back just to make sure you didn't skip something by accident. So once your tool is complete and you've done that check, you can actually one thing here. I wanted to point out one more thing before we get here. So one other thing on the results summary table is that this is the first place that you can really see those 4 scores that we talked about. So the first is that overall mutual reinforcement score, and then a score for each of those 3 subscales. So for principles, for infrastructure, and then if you scroll down for service delivery strategies. And that's not the only place you can see your scores. So heading to this next tab, the results summary chart. This chart will automatically update as you're entering your answers into the tool. So we hope that this type of visual snapshot will really be helpful in tracking your responses over time and any movement that you see in your score based on efforts that you take to strengthen mutual reinforcement in your initiative or your work together. And I mentioned this earlier, but all of the scores here are on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 indicating what we think is the strongest level of mutual reinforcement. So if we take this example here based on the data I put in the tool, you'll see that there's room for growth in all the areas based on my responses, but the infrastructure score here is really the lowest. So based on these data, this might really be an area where I would focus my efforts with my 2-generation partners. So the next tab here is entitled Interpreting Your Results. This just provides some information on each of the subscales, including which questions contribute to each subscale score, and then some more technical information about how the measurement tool is programmed. And once you go through this whole process, you might think, this is great, but I would love to be able to print this out and share this with whom I'm working with. So if you go back to the introduction and instructions, that first tab, and scroll to the bottom, you'll have this print workbook button. So clicking that button will generate a PDF of all your responses, your scores, and that really helpful results summary visualization. If at any point you also need to start over, say you completed a couple of tabs, you want to start over again, you can also use this wipe responses button that's on the first tab, and that'll allow you to start from the beginning. We can just take a look at what that actually does. Oh, and I have to enable macros on my computer. So we'll do that, a different time. So like we said before, despite the early stage of development, we really do hope that this tool can be used in its current form so that 2-generation initiatives or agencies or communities that are focused on whole family approaches can use this internally and with their partners to identify what are our program's strengths, what are our initiative strengths, and what are areas for improvement that we could work on together to strengthen mutual reinforcement. So that's it for the demo. Scott, if you could share your slides again, I think we have 2 more here. All right. So based on what we learned in that small pilot study that we did, we wanted to share the steps that we suggest that you take to complete the tool. So to start, we recommend you work with your colleagues. It can be really challenging for one person to have all the answers, and sitting down with your colleagues to discuss the tool can help you and your partners identify what your shared 2-generation initiative is doing well and where and how you might be able to improve. So we have a 2-step process here that you might follow. We did test step 1 in our pilot, but we didn't test step 2. Instead, we created step 2 based on input from the staff in the pilot about how they envisioned they would take a tool like this and use it internally and with their partners. So for step 1, we suggest you complete the tool within your organization or your agency, even if you partner with several organizations as part of your initiative. So each partner organization within an initiative would complete the tool internally with key staff. In the pilot, it worked well when about 3 staff were involved, including someone who was really familiar with how the initiative used stored, maybe shared data. And then using the results, staff would identify improvements that would strengthen mutual reinforcement, really with an emphasis on their organization's contributions to the initiative. And staff would use responses to question 1 in the tool, where they list all of their distinct 2-generation partners to determine who should be involved in this initiative-wide reflection in step 2, where we all get in a room together and talk about what our responses were. So in step 2, representatives from each partner organization, including staff who are really authorized to envision and implement process change, would meet to discuss the organization level results. And then kind of using those collective results, comparing them, what score did you get? What score did you get? Partners would determine improvements they could make to strengthen mutual reinforcement really across the whole initiative. And the thinking here is that if one person is saying, our infrastructure score is through the roof, and another partner is saying, well, we scored our whole initiative, pretty low here, that might be a point to discuss why there's divergence there and why there might be some disagreement. And then finally, we have an arrows really to represent here a recommendation to repeat this process over time. So some sort of regular interval so that you can understand your initiative's level of mutual reinforcement and how it might change when you make efforts to strengthen mutual reinforcement. So some good timing to complete this exercise might be, part of annual planning or when you make changes to your logic model or key processes or services. And finally, we've done a lot of talking today. We wanted to give voice to some of the initiatives that participated with us in the pilot of the measurement tool as we were developing it. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of reflections that we heard from those participants. So one staff person said, this tool will be useful for us and our partners. We like seeing where gaps in knowledge or communication might be, and it's not a big time ask to fill this out. Another said, we do monthly report outs, so it would be helpful to say as a collaborative, we started here and now we're here. It would help us with relationship building and seeing it as something we're doing together, not as a siloed approach. And then finally, here's what a third staff person said about working as a group. They said, completing the tool as a group was really an aha moment for us about how we could approach this in a holistic sense. Now we have a monthly meeting set up to discuss data, programs, and reporting together. And that is it for what we had planned to share in presentation, but we are very happy to answer any questions you might have about using this tool on your own, or I know there's been lots of chatter in the chat related to other resources as part of the NS2G project. So if you'd like to ask about, some of those other resources, we'd be happy to do that as well.
Kara, one of the questions was about, I'm not sure I understand what's being assessed here. And I think when you went over to the definitions page, if you could go back there, maybe highlight how in the definitions for principles and infrastructure, you are very clear about what is being assessed, but maybe share with the group why Mathematica and OPRE landed on those constructs or those elements to be assessed, right?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And Scott, I'd encourage you to weigh in here too. I would say at the very start of this project.
Could you show your screen those definitions while you're talking, please?
Sure. And I think maybe the definitions you were referring to, Jeannie, might be the ones that are not on the definitions tab, but maybe in the interpreting your results where there's the definition of the different subskills there. So I would say at the start of the project, we had a 2-generation expert panel of researchers and other folks who'd really engaged deeply in this work. And, we didn't have all the money in the world. So we said, we can only develop one measure. We're trying to figure out what is most critical in terms of something that we could measure in 2-generation programming or initiatives. And what we kept coming back to was we'd consider one thing, we'd consider another thing, and we'd say, but does that really capture what's unique? Does that capture 2-gen-ness? And that's this word that was kind of our guiding star as we were thinking about what we would develop a measure for. And I think mutual reinforcement was something that it really tackles these related ideas of the principles, the infrastructure, the service delivery strategies, but how does that all come together to really make something that's unique, where we're aligning and building on the strengths and expertise of all these different service providers so that we can hopefully move outcomes for families faster and further than if we were just thinking about, children or caregivers on their own. But Scott, I don't know if you have anything else that you'd like to add to that part there.
Just to add, Kara, and I think that was exactly right on. When we started this process as well, we also did a little bit of searching to look at like what tools and what different measures were already out there. What literature was saying about how organizations work together and the dimensions that where it's important for partners to work together. And so that's where some of these things were coming from as well.
And Jeannie, I'll also add that one space where a lot of that literature and research came from and existing tools that we really borrowed from and thinking about what this would look like was from the collective impact space. So thinking about, how are we showing up and braiding and layering services on in a way that's really helpful for families. So that's where a lot of this inspiration that you see here comes from.
That makes a lot of sense to me, because I recognize the components of collective impact in the shared vision and the mutual goals, and I think that really leads to my second kind of clarifying question that I wanted you to speak to. So I love that you sort of say do this internally, and we kind of talked at the conference about how many community action agencies have multiple interventions in the organization, so they could do this, across their set of interventions and activities that they're using for parents and children in their whole family approach. And then they may have a group of partners, which kind of connects up to the collective impact idea, that are coming together to do 2Gen. And so I see there in the principles, in the definition, it says the partner organizations within the 2Generation initiative. And so some of our community action agencies may have taken their whole family approach out beyond the walls of the community action agency, and some are still in the early phases and may not. But what you are not asking people to just give this to random partners and have them fill it out, right? This has got to be when you have a group of folks who've come together to wrap around parents and children in a whole family approach. That's what you mean by partner organizations, right? So just if you could just speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Jeannie. I mean, I think if you gave this tool out willy-nilly, you probably wouldn't have really great discussion or consensus potentially. I mean, when we were initially developing this tool, we were thinking about this as an evaluative tool. So something that evaluators could use to really measure something that we think is important in 2Generation approaches. And we definitely think that that's still a use case for this. But what we saw in the pilot was how much these participants were talking about this would be so useful to use as like a tool, a conversation starter, something that's quantifiable that we can use, internally within my organization, but also with, say, like the housing agency that they're working with, or post-secondary institutions where parents are enrolled. So thinking about I think it's okay to think, let's start small. And I think this tool can meet you where you're at as an agency. So if you're really just within one organization that is, trying to provide whole family services, I think that's okay to just do step one. Maybe once you're further along in that journey and you're working more externally with more and more partners within your community that are, kind of outside your organization or your agency, that would be great to involve them in this exercise. So I do think that it could be used in lots of different ways that way.
Yeah. So that sort of connects up with the question we just got about we don't have a 2G initiative and also are not a CA. We are a government housing agency. Would this apply to us? So one of the things I'm really excited about, and we really promoted a lot of our community action agencies, whether they are just getting started or have been on, 2Gen journey for several years, to jump on this webinar today. Because even if you're just starting, I think these definitions, this sort of the way you've articulated in the report, what these components of principles, infrastructure, and strategies, what's in there, signals to people what they might want to pay attention to when they get started, right? Like that first one about principles, a shared vision for change, a common theory of change to positively affect both generations within a family. If you're just getting started, that's good places to spend your time, right? So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, Jeannie, I feel like you explained exactly what I would have said probably in your question. But I do think that going to this, interpreting your results tab, you could use this to work backwards. So to really see, what are the definitions of kind of these key areas that are included here, these subscales, and figure out, well, what's a shared vision for change? What's a common theory of change to positively affect both generations within a family? One, maybe I'm not totally sure what that means, and go look at those important definitions on that second tab. And two, that sounds important. Maybe we should have one. So I do think this can be used almost to reverse engineer some early conversations that you might consider having, within your agency or organization or with some of your partners, just to get some of that alignment in what it's going to take to work together to serve whole families. So I think it's not something we exactly thought about, but I think it would be a great way, kind of an innovative way to work backwards using some of the latter parts of this tool, Jeannie.
Yeah. And we're going to post, the partnership's going to post in the chat. We have a whole family approach design plan. And that whole design plan walks people through the process of developing a theory of change and a logic model, identifying your partners, aligning services. So if you do the whole family approach design plan, you would have every one of these items here, and so we recommend that people do that as an agency and as a collaborative. And so if you're on today and you're just getting started, pick up the design plan, and it'll definitely prepare you for many of these activities that are represented here. So we also have a question, and maybe Scott, you've had a chance to look at the question from Angela Martin in Maryland about, will additional elements be added, i.e. outcomes? Was that considered in the development? Do you guys have a thought about that?
Yeah.
Sky, go ahead.
Yeah, so this tool, I think Kara mentioned at the beginning, is just a draft. This is the first step in developing a tool like this. And so, Kara, you might want to reiterate some parts of that process. But we've developed this tool. We haven't done the testing to understand exactly whether these definitions, whether these components are linked to outcomes. That's like the next phase of research development. And so, we felt it was important to put it out at this stage, however, so that other organizations could take it and run with it and try it. So I don't know whether you have anything to add, Kara.
I think the only thing I would add there is that, like Scott alluded to, this is early stage and we were only able to do, pretty small pilot as part of its development. But Scott is going to include our email addresses at the end of this. And if you try this, I would love to hear how it's working for you and how that process went as well. So I would definitely encourage you to reach out to us and let us know if you give it a try.
Anybody want to unmute and ask a question directly of Kara and Scott? So I thought maybe it might be good to go to the website, and either maybe one of you could do that or I could do that and show screen and make sure people can kind of see that the actual Excel, and there's a PDF, and those are like down under the appendix. And I just want to make sure people don't miss those. And they can kind of see where those are at. And it's really, I loved it when I just noticed that you have a PDF. Sometimes I just like to read through things, right? And so obviously the Excel document is there, but a PDF document. And if you can show those, that would be great. And other questions that folks might have.
Scott, do you mind pulling up that web page?
Yeah, I'm
You
doing it right
already
now.
started. Great.
Okay.
And Jeannie, I would say the other thing about wanting a PDF, I had these terrible visions of trying to get 20 people crowded around one laptop to look at an Excel screen. So we hope that that PDF will be helpful for some of that collaboration. You can always go into the Excel afterwards and enter your scores.
Good point. I could see that too. Yeah, that makes sense.
So this is the website for the tool. So you can see here that you can click here and download a brief, and the brief talks about the process for developing the tool and some of the findings from the pilot we did with the 3 2-generation initiatives that participated in it. And then if you scroll down and you click on the button here by appendix, you can see right here, Appendix D. This is the link to click to download the Excel version of the tool. The PDF is Appendix C. And then if you are really interested, we have 2 technical appendices that talk about some of the methods of the pilot study and also some of the nitty gritty about how the scoring works for the tool. Let me just scroll up as well. So you can see also on the related resources side here, these links will take you to some of the other products that we've put out as part of NS2G. And these relate to the formative evaluation that I mentioned very briefly earlier and talked about in Atlanta. But we have a brief on developing a 2-generation logic model. Using that logic model to identify opportunities to strengthen your services. And then another brief about using rapid cycle learning to test and refine program improvement strategies.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Well, folks, does anybody have an idea about how they might use this in their agency that they'd like to share with colleagues? We have over 60 folks on the webinar today, and I can see, I see some of these names, and I'm not going to call on anybody, but I know we have people who are all over the continuum of just starting whole family to, having done whole family for several years. So be great if some folks could sort of share just their initial thoughts about how they might use this tool. Great. How we might improve, which that gets to right to rapid cycle learning, doesn't it? How are we going to improve? Okay, and I see Allie is going to share with her ED and very excited. Janika in New Orleans, they've been at things for a while. What kind of progress are they going to make? Barbara Mooney, I see that you are one of our participants, and I am going to kind of put you on the spot. Barbara, it leads our National Certified Roma Training and CERT organization. And so they're very much, Barbara is a guru and a mama for all of our outcomes and accountability and results. And Barbara, if you can speak, what are you thinking when you see this? She might not be in a place where she can talk. The Angela, Scott and Kara, Angela is at the State Association in Maryland, and the Maryland agencies have been, of course, from working with Garrett, receiving some state money. And so sounds like Angela's excited to see this. Oh, okay. No option to unmute, it sounds like. So we maybe have this set up as a different kind of meeting, but we can see that people are affirming that. Any other questions or comments that you want to put in the chat? All right. Any final comments from our Mathematica friends?
Well, just while as a way of final comments, let me put up here again a link to all of the resources that we showed you. So this QR code will take you to the page where you can access all of these. These are the three briefs that I mentioned earlier on a logic model and program improvement strategies, the tool that Kara just presented on, and our final study report, if you are interested in that as well. There's a lot of great stuff in there about some of the things that the initiatives learned through the formative evaluations and some ideas and strategies as well. And then I will leave you with our email addresses. So please, please don't hesitate to reach out, contact us if you have any questions, or if you use the tool and want to report back to us, good or bad. We are very interested in your feedback and seeing folks start to use this tool. It's really important because that's how these things get refined and strengthened over time.
All right. Katie, anything you want to share as a closing?
Yes, can you guys see me? Okay. Denise, can you bring up the slides, please?
Are you showing a slide deck, Katie?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, it's
Okay,
coming.
guys.
Here we go.
So in
Yep.
the chat, there will be a link to a little evaluation survey. Your response is very important to us, and we hope to hear from you. And then September 12th through the 13th, join the National Community Action Partnership for their data convening in Denver, Colorado. To learn more, you can scan the QR code or there will be a link in the chat. And then join us on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. for Webinar Wednesdays. Content areas include financial empowerment, energy, whole family approach, and much more. You can scan the QR code or find the link in the chat. And the Community Action Academy is a free online learning hub for the Community Action Network. Courses include family-centered coaching, advancing racial equity, Roma, and much more. You can scan the QR code or find the link in the chat. In our Fresh Finds, explore the latest resources, webinars, and funding opportunities from other organizations engaging in anti-poverty efforts. You can scan the QR code or find the link in the chat. And again, thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you, Scott and Kara, incredible. And this is a contact list for us at the National Community Action Partnership. If you have any questions, you can contact us here. Thank you all so much.